I gotta know the name of it, where these restoring old World War II planes.
Oh, he probably watches it then. Oh my gosh.
They don't run it to like the county and
Each
the.
episode is on one guy and the plane. It's about the plane and about, but then it's.
Oh my.
There's some real serious problems here. This town that we're looking at, down in Texas, around trying to find something.
Right next
I'm
to
not
Miss
sure
St.
which one
Arnold.
it is, but you're one of these two.
Worried about. So I guess it's on the documentary.
Is that you?
This is me right here.
There you go, that's John.
All right, you made it.
That was harder than going to work today.
Good evening, it's 7 o'clock, on, what is the date today? January 23rd, 2017. This is the Planning and Zoning Board for the City of Tarpon Springs. My name is Bill Vinson, I'm the chairman. And we'll begin with the roll call.
Mr. Vinson,
Here?
Mr. Carr. Here. Mr. Parker,
Here.
Mr. Gialosis, Miss St. Arnold,
Here.
Mr. Seaman,
Here.
Mr. Hasse,
Here?
and Miss Protos.
Okay, we have a quorum, and we'll begin by having our announcement of the quasi-judicial and swearing in of speakers. If you plan to speak tonight or give testimony, be sure to listen carefully, and when the time comes to stand and be sworn, if you're going to give any speaking at the podium.
This is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the Planning and Zoning Board acts in a quasi-judicial rather than a legislative capacity. At a quasi-judicial hearing, it is not the board's function to make law, but rather to apply law that has already been established. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board is required by law to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence at this hearing that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues. If the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find in the favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant. Are there any members of the board wishing to disclose any ex parte communications this evening? Seeing none, if there's anyone here wishing to speak this evening, if you could please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn in. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is item number 3, application number 16-21. It's ordinance 2017-02, comprehensive plan text amendment, amending the residential very low category of the future land use element of the comprehensive plan to be consistent with the countywide plan. And we'll begin with the staff report.
Just an initial announcement on this particular application. This is not a quasi-judicial application. This is a legislative action that this board will be taking. Any adoption of land use amendments is actually legislative, not quasi-judicial. And with that, staff report. This is a text amendment to the Cities of Tarpon Springs Comprehensive Plan by revising the residential very low category, land use category within the future land use amendment. Just a little bit of background. We had a project that came actually before this board that originally was the impetus for the creation of this category back several years ago now. It started in 2015 was when you originally created this category. As a result of that amendment, we've actually had to make some changes to the language when the countywide plan was adopted last year. They changed the language of their residential very low category, and as a result, staff has been in the process of changing that. One of the comments that we received back as part of the process where we send it for state coordinator review, we came back from FDOT that they wanted some additional language having to deal with secondary uses and thresholds for traffic generation under secondary uses. So what you see before you in Exhibit 1 is the changes outlined by the request of both, for the request to meet the statutory requirements of to make it consistent with the future land use category within the countywide plan, as well as changes within secondary use category. About halfway down under C, there's a new bullet point that's been added. All secondary uses will be evaluated to determine the potential for increased trip generation and the impact of the use on the mobility management system. And the reason why this was added was FDOT felt that many of the uses that you have here as secondary uses, including institutional uses and public facility uses or public education uses, can generate higher trip thresholds than any type of residential at the density that you're dealing with. You're dealing with a density of 0 to 1 unit per acre. That is a very low trip generation threshold. So as a result, they wanted some additional language added here so that they were confident that we would have the ability to evaluate any of those secondary uses that might come into this category. Now, recognize that this category has not actually been placed on your map yet. The McAlpine project has only gone through their initial transmittal phase. They're in the process of going out for state coordinated review to get any comments back from the state on that project. So that this land use category, while it exists in your plan, it does not exist on your map as of today's date. It will exist on your map once it goes back through the process and the board formally adopts the project for the McAlpine piece, should that happen after the state coordinated review. With that, I can explain any changes that as they are, but Section B and Section D, you currently already saw that beginning of last year when I ran this amendment originally through. That language just wasn't formally adopted because we got a comment back from the state and we needed to include that language. So I can answer any questions that you have on this particular application.
Any questions of the staff, from the board members?
Yes, so this is not, maybe it's wrong to use the word cleanup.
No, that's appropriate. That's an appropriate thing. This is a consistency issue. We need to have a consistent plan with the countywide plan because we're using the same future land use category that they use on their plan. So if we're doing that, then we need to have a clean, consistent match with their information.
So it's either the word cleanup or the word adjustment.
Correct.
Any other questions for staff? Comments or questions from the public on this issue? Please come to the podium, state your name and address.
Farrell Vaughn, 2271 Keystone Road, Tarpon Springs, Florida. And while I understand this is strictly zoning, and she did mention the McAlpine property, obviously we're very affected by the McAlpine property. But I'd just like to add a few comments and questions. We'd like to inquire if there are or can be any preclusions to the residential very low land use category to prevent land abuse such as dredging, excessive excavation, and dumping, particularly in vulnerable locations, and I reference Lake Tarpon, Salt Lake, rivers, etc. Sinkholes are a constant fear to all of us, and I don't see very much consideration in zoning codes to give citizens any protection. We've lived through fear of these sinkholes and been warned and lost our sinkhole coverage. And I don't see much concern for the fact that they're everywhere, but dredging can be permitted right next to your property. If there is no protection in the language for these zonings and land use considerations, can protection for the environment and surrounding zoning codes be provided for in this land use category so abuse can't occur? Or can perhaps SwiftMud step in and override the city or ignore the city and provide a dredging permit so dirt can be obtained to fill borrow pits and correct violations on any property included in this land use category, which the McAlpin property is at this point. We couldn't live through any more dredging. And I don't know what's going to be allowed, what's going to be modified. That's why we're here. We're very concerned. Can the city of Tarpon Springs mandate against adverse site requests? It would be wonderful to know that all zoning codes are respectful of our environment and that the city would do all it can to possibly prevent any danger of sinkholes or damages to residents. We worry about future modifications to the residential very low. It obviously is going to affect us greatly. We don't mind homes. As a matter of fact, we'd rather see homes than the devastation we've seen the last 10 years. That should never be allowed, especially across the street from Lake Tarpon. We're told to respect Lake Tarpon's watershed, and we do. We take care of the wildlife, we respect the wildlife, we do everything we can. And we don't mind homes, we don't mind neighbors, but we do mind being put in a spot where we could have sinkholes, where our home was destroyed by filth and dirt dredged out of the earth. And I remind you, this is right across the street from Lake Tarpon. Who do we believe? Do we believe our government? Is this true? Do you really care about that watershed area? I don't see much concern. But the thing that really bothers me is I don't see concern for citizens having to try to buy sinkhole coverage, and you can't because of dredging right next to your property. I think that's a sin. But I thank you for listening.
Ms. Vaughn, I have a question. When you talk about dredging, do you mean excavating?
No, I'm talking about dredging.
Dredging out of?
The McAlpin property was dredged to enlarge his lake.
Okay, I see.
And it went on for 2 to 3 years. And as I've said in letters on the other applications that are in on his property, that stuff's airborne. It covered our home. Filthy, wet muck for 2 to 3 years. And I wouldn't, we had an attorney that was a county attorney for Opelousas County in the Panhandle. Excellent person. He had retired after 22 years as an EPA attorney. And he wanted us to file a lawsuit. He didn't like what he saw at all. He even offered his work pro bono. All we'd have to do is pay his expenses from the county, from North Panhandle down. But we're not lawsuit people, and we certainly don't want to sue our own city. But in retrospect, we probably should have. We should have never sustained the damage we did because of some other person making a whole lot of money. And it's a very sore spot. But we lived through it. We replaced what we had to replace, but I would never want to go there again. But what did happen should have never happened. And he said he could have stopped it. Whether he could or not, I don't know. But we beat him at the county. We got a 200-foot setback. But he annexed into the city and was awarded a 50-foot setback, and that's when it really got ugly. But he got a permit from SwiftMud, and his engineer, who was, I presume, back on the project, Michael Landon, who is an exceptional engineer. And I'm sure they would have never received that dredging permit from SwiftMud without him. But I'm very worried because he is back on the project. Although they denied knowing even know why the property was annexed in the first place, I reminded him, I have a complete file. But I thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Vaughn. Any board members have any questions of Ms. Vaughn? Any other members of the public wish to speak at this time? Okay, we're here for a motion and then discussion.
I'll move for approval for discussion purposes.
Second.
First is moved for approval, second by Mr. Carr, to approve of the proposed amendment. Now we're open for discussion among the board. Yes, Anita?
First of all, I want to clarify something.
Can you pull
and-
the microphone
And
closer?
I may be wrong, but a lot of that work was done with permitting through the county at the very beginning, before it even came into the city. And Swift Mud went to the county, I remember that, and didn't even come to the city at that time because the property was all within the county. We cannot be responsible for what the county does. That overrides. And secondly, I would like to say something. Mrs. Vaughn is a very astute researcher. She does her homework, and I admire her for that. But the decision we have to make tonight, and correct me if I'm wrong, our planner and chairman and the attorney, is to work with this in the land use plan. And we cannot judge whether someone's going to make money or not. That's their right. That's not our right to say yes or no. You know, and people will do this. That's how it is. And we can't deny anything on that issue. If the county has it, they have it for a purpose. And that means we have to upgrade, correct, Heather? We have to upgrade our land use plan to coincide with a lot of the ordinances that the county has. We do have the right to lay back on some of them, but when it comes to things like this in development, because it's so far out and the county abuts it, this is why we do this.
Well, there's a requirement in your comprehensive plan for you to be consistent with both the county-wide land use plan and your county ordinances, as well as the Florida statutes. As a result, in order to create the consistency necessary with the changes that happen in the countywide plan, this is the first step. Every one of your land use categories is going to be looked at in the next year. That's one of the things that the consultant and I are working on, and there will be future amendments coming forward to all of the land use categories. This is the first land use category that's getting that attention because we have a project that is going to be directly impacted by it. So it's one of those things that we as staff recognize that there is things that need to happen in a certain time frame to have projects move forward. So we've advanced this from what you'll see probably later in the summer, which is your ear-based amendment. So yes, this is for the consistency with the countywide rules, and it is clearly probably more imperative because of the fact that you have surrounding county areas in the one particular area where this land use is really going to fall right now, that we meet that consistency. But it is required regardless by your comprehensive plan to be consistent, which is what
Well,
your staff is in the process of doing.
But I just want it understood that all that went on that she spoke about, that Mrs. Vaughn spoke about, is correct, but it happened through the county, not the city, because I had people ask me about that who had heard about the hearing. And I said it was with the county, the city. It wasn't the city that gave the permission. I'll hear the others, and if I have any more, I'll come back.
Heather, maybe you can address the issue of the role of the zoning code regarding uses, such as excavation or dredging. I mean, how those interplay with I know permits seem to be required for a lot of that, but is that something that's separate from the land use code or comprehensive plan?
Okay, so you're dealing with two different documents. You're dealing with right now the comprehensive plan,
Right.
and yes, you are correct. The zoning ordinance does deal with uses. It further defines the types of uses that you can have as they're outlined in each land use category. It then adds additional regulations and puts in place to regulate things like impacts to adjacent neighbors and those type of things in development. I can't really speak to what happened on McAlpine. I wasn't here. The record that I have is not a full record, okay? I understand Ms. Vaughn has a much better understanding, and I would defer to her on the impacts that she suffered with that project. I cannot even promise you that since that project, things have been changed and it would never happen again. That's not something that I'm ever going to make that statement. We are in the process of updating all of your land development and zoning regulations to be consistent with the state regulations and with the local county regulations and the countywide plan. As a result, that is what this amendment is from. So the answer is yes, you do have regulations that deal with some types of uses and definitely negative uses. Whether they are nearly as tight as they need to be, that's not something that I'm ready to judge because it's not something that I've dealt with. That dredging permit that was provided to Mr. McAlpine, there's not another permit that's come with that kind of request in your community. So as a result, it's really hard to judge that against what current development you have here in the community. But I can tell you that federal regulation and state regulation has certainly changed since that time.
I'd just like to comment that this predates my involvement, and I don't know anything about the history on this project. But as someone who serves as a consultant in some cases and assists people in pulling permits for dredging and functions like that at times, the process today to get a permit for dredging from SwiftMud or Florida DEP is tremendously difficult and has an amazing number of safeguards in place. It takes months or years to do in many cases. So I feel like probably what happened in the past would not be able to happen again today because it is a tremendously difficult process to permit things like this properly.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Any other comments by the board?
I have one. So from what I understand, all we're asked to do tonight is just to agree to this piece of paper and this change. It has nothing to do with anything else or the comprehensive plan or anything else. This is strictly, we're just voting on if this wording is okay or not. So it has nothing to do with anything else.
Well, it has to do with the comprehensive plan because it's language from your comprehensive
Right.
plan, but that's the limits of what we're asking you to do tonight.
And we can't change the comprehensive plan.
Mm-mm.
So, okay.
We ready for a motion?
We've got a motion. Any other comments? Roll call vote.
Ms. Protos?
Yes.
Mr. Hasse?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Ms. St. Arnold?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Carr?
Yes.
Mr. Vincent?
Yes. Okay, the motion, that ordinance is approved.
Mr. Chairman, can I just
Yes.
goes before the board? Okay. That's fine. I just want to make sure that you knew that, okay? Have a great day.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is application 16-134, conditional use, community garden resolution number 2017, and it doesn't have a number there afterwards. It's for conditional use to allow community garden on property located at 116 North Ring Avenue in the CRM, which is Conditional Residential Mix, 7.5 zoning district. I'll begin with the staff report.
Okay. With that, again, this is a conditional use for community garden. No structures are proposed at this time. The applicant is the city. Essentially, what we're trying to do here is prepare the Jesse Burke property. There was a demolition of the structure July of last year. HPB gave approval for that. And then it subsequently happened, I believe, in September or October of last year. As a result, this board tackled an amendment to the what is it called? The Conditional Residential Mixed Land Use District to allow for community gardens in that district. When we adopted that amendment to the Land Development Code to allow for the community gardens, we did it as a conditional use. So as a result, this is now the culmination of a 3-stage process at this particular point to get a community garden on that property. So with that, Let me go through a little bit more of the analysis for this. The types of things that staff looked at as part of this was, would somebody need a building there? That location is part of the National Historic District, so it's a historic property, which is the reason why we had to go to Heritage Preservation Board for the demolition of the structure. As a result, any new structure that will be proposed when the community garden, the city is now in the process of seeking an entity to come in and actually lease that piece of property from us. When that happens, they'll determine what their needs are actually going to be, and we'll negotiate those needs with them. Along with that, we recognize that they're probably going to want a structure of some sort. It will probably be some type of storage structure. So I've put some language in here that limits that, and it's based on your land development code, and we'll go over that as well. But right now, there is no structure that is being proposed as part of this. That will come later through the heritage preservation process. The community garden, again, need for a shed or a storage structure to store gardening equipment, and staff has addressed the following other issues in the analysis and conditions of this report. Limitations on the size of the accessory building or structure, setbacks for any proposed accessory structure, and hours of operation. We have some concerns. Again, you're dealing with a community garden that is in an established residential neighborhood. I recognize that that neighborhood has a lot of institutional uses, this being included in this particular city hall. But that being the case, it still is a residential neighborhood, and we do want to be recognizing that people are living here. We don't want to be having people at community gardens in inappropriate hours disturbing the neighbors. So as a result, that's why we looked at those hours of operations as a consideration. With that, conformance of the requirements of the Land Development Code analysis, Section 2705, parking credits and flexible allocations provided for the following parking relief. Because this property is so close to City Hall, we have a municipal parking lot that is within walking distance to that property. So as a result, there will be no actual parking on that particular property. It will be accomplished either along Ring Avenue, which is where we will be putting a handicap parking space to access it. We'll then be doing improvements, the city, to the sidewalk to be able to utilize that handicap parking space. And then general parking for anybody who is going to be using that site, they would be able to park here at City Hall. They would have that option. The City Hall lot is very infrequently full, and we do have an additional lot right here on the corner of Ring and Pine for overflow as well. So we do have sufficient parking in the general vicinity of this project, so staff is confident that we do not have to require parking on the property for it to be consistent with the Land Development Code. Okay. The use which of the property may be put is appropriate to the property in question and is compatible with the existing and planned uses in the area. Location of the community garden is appropriately located within the center of a neighborhood and is an appropriate use within that residential neighborhood. Again, this is a community garden within an established neighborhood. There's not a whole lot of concerns because we can accommodate things like parking and the facilities that people are going to need. We have 2 bathrooms, the one here at City Hall that's available Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then there's another one in the municipal parking lot uptown that isn't that far of a walking distance as well, that's open dawn to dusk. So as a result, we just feel that we've provided the facilities necessary for this to fit very nicely within the community. Conditional use will not result in significant adverse effects to the environment or historical resources. Since the conditional use requested is for gardening, it will not result in any adverse impacts to environment or, again, historical resources. Yes, a structure will go on this property, but that structure will have to meet the requirements of the design guidelines when HPB reviews it. So as a result, any person putting anything on this property is going to have to recognize that it is a historically valuable property and that anything that going on there would have to be consistent with the historic nature of the area. The conditional use will not adversely affect adjoining property values. No adverse impacts to adjoining property values are anticipated as the result of the conditional use request being approved. The lot square footage and lot width of the property do not meet the requirements of the district, so development of a development would be difficult. As a result, development of a traditional single-family detached home, 2-family home, or multifamily home with single-family detached or semi-detached allowed as permitted to be developed on the site. The diminishing marketability of the site, the requested use would be an asset to the community in providing nutritional food sources within the neighborhood, promoting community awareness, cooperation, and pride in providing additional learning opportunities within the neighborhood and community. Again, because of the size of the property, it's so small, it would be very difficult to develop anything else within that property where we're going to get any type of return. You may be able to get a single-family home in there. A two-family home's not going to work. It does not meet the dimensional criteria of that district. So as a result, you're not going to get that use on that property. That being the case, this is probably one of the better types of uses that you can have on that property where you're going to have a very limited impact on the adjacent neighbors. The conditional use will not adversely impact nor exceed the capacity of the fiscal ability of the city to provide available public facilities, including transportation, water, sewer, solid waste, drainage, recreation, education, fire protection, library services, other similar public facilities. Utilities are already on that property. We actually pulled the water meter off the property when, and the sewer meter off the property when the building was demoed. So water is available right outside of the property. Solid waste is available within our contract with Waste Management. So there will be little to no impact. What they probably will have connected out there is water to water plants. They will probably utilize our sewer, or sorry, not our sewer, but our solid waste provider. Those are the types of impacts that you're looking at here. You're not looking at the same type of impacts that you would have with a single-family residential unit. However, there was a person living on that property for a long time. And so as a result, there's historically been the impact onto those facilities. It's just at this point, that impact has been eliminated because the property's been vacant now for some time. With that, conditional use shall provide the efficient and orderly development considering the impact upon growth patterns and the cost of the city to provide public facilities. Again, it's a developed site. It was previously developed, and we have the utilities there. Finally, staff's recommendation. Staff is recommending approval of Resolution 2017-01 requesting a conditional use to allow a community garden at 116 North Ring Avenue in the CRM-7.5 zoning district, subject to the following condition. The property is to be used as a community garden. All other uses are subject to further review and subsequent approval consistent with the Land Development Code. The hours of operation of the community garden are from sunrise to sunset. The maximum size of the accessory structure will be determined at the time of permitting pursuant to LDC Section 36.00 and Section 210.01. The setbacks for the accessory structure are as follows: rear setback of 5 feet, side setback of 7.5 feet. The maximum allowed height for the accessory structure is 20 feet. Any accessory structure is to be approved by the technical review team pursuant to LDC Section 36.00, 210.01, and 230.00. Any accessory structure must be reviewed by the Heritage Preservation Board pursuant to LDC Section 109.00 to be consistent with the city's design review guideline manual. All accessory structures to be constructed on the property will require building permit approval subsequent to technical review team and Heritage Preservation Board approval. The conditional use will expire within 1 year of the approval if the building permit is not issued on the property. And essentially, the only building permit that you'll have on this property to actually activate the use will be a building permit associated with that accessory structure, because you're not going to have a primary use going on the property, at least at this time. The conditional use for the community garden is your primary use. With that, I can answer any questions that you might have.
Who's going to operate the garden or oversee it?
The city's currently in the process of looking for a provider. We've put out a letter of interest, and those who are interested in going through the public bidding process to set up a dual lease with the county or the city would be entitled to take out papers and make their request. But at this time, the city has not actually selected someone.
What about our GROW group that we support here?
What was that?
What about the GROW group that we have here in Tarpon that we support and work with?
I don't know if the GROW group is actually taking out a request. They currently are housed under the public service and the recreation area, and I'm pretty sure that they're covered with the location that they currently have and with their current work plan. But that's not something that I don't know that they're going to be they were interested in taking over this piece of property. It's always been something that was going to be released into the community somehow, and that's what we're doing. But I thought about that too, Anita, when this came about, was, oh, this would be a great opportunity for the GROW group to utilize, put up a small greenhouse, let them grow plants. They can then sell them to other people who want to either put them in their gardens or have a spot there to put them. But that's not something that anybody was really interested in at this particular time. It's not like it won't be an option. Certainly this facility and with whoever's going to have some type of education component. I just don't think that that was a plan at this time to make that connection. I think it's one of those things that over time it's going to just naturally knit its way in together because they do that. They grow a lot of vegetable plants and that type of thing for folks
I just
for you to buy and put into your own garden.
I just thought about it for them to work in the garden and help the city, cultivate the garden and give them that experience. That's what I was thinking of it. But what you suggested is even better.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens with that. This is one of those new things that we're trying out here in the city. So it's one of those things that I think with time, some of the other things that we have here, other groups that are working, we have, a garden club, we have a couple other things. I think that they're either going to want to be part of that or they're going to partner with that group, whoever that group ends up being, because right now we don't really know who it's going to be at this particular time. The city's just getting it ready because we want to be able to be ready for planting season that's coming right around the corner. And this process takes some time to go through the conditional use.
Well, Commissioner Reyes Saver has worked for over 2.5 years to get that.
I know she has.
That is correct, yeah.
My
Commissioner
understanding
Severs.
is that this is a formality right now with the RFP, that there is an organization that's interested in running the garden right now, but they're just putting it out there because it's by law in the city that they have to put it out there available to other organizations if they want to bid to be part of that or the community garden, or run it, I suppose.
Yeah, you have to go through the public bid process, so that you're right, Jacob, they do have to go through the formality. There is a group that's out there, but until that goes through, it's the city's position that it's a part of the public bid process and the person is yet to be selected.
So this has to be a group, an organized group. It just can't be like the neighborhood that they all come and grow something on that property.
Not on this particular piece, because it's owned by the city. The city has to go out through the public bid process to have that type of use. And in this particular case, they chose to look for a nonprofit or some other group that is an existing group that wants to come in and do that. Now, they may, through their own structure, develop rental spaces or that type of thing for folks. Again, none of that's really been worked out at this particular point, how the garden's going to work. We're really just trying to get the land use ready so that somebody, when they're through the process, can get going.
In the state of Virginia, right out of Washington, D.C., they have in their land use plan, they have ordinance where developers build these beautiful homes, but what sells is that the people have a community garden within that development. They even can have gardens on their property, but they have a space at this. It was on TV. It was beautiful. They have a space within the development that is a garden for the homeowners right there, and it's become very, very successful. And now they're starting it in New York State, Illinois, and there was another state. It was on the Sunday morning program that comes on at 9 o'clock on Sundays on Channel 10. And they are saying that this is going to be something new in land use and development coming up throughout the United States. And it was very successful. They sold, and they're getting ready to build another one. I don't know if you've ever seen any of that information that comes to you, but I wish we had something like that, but I don't know where it would be in Tarpon Springs. We have no more land left.
Well, any of the developments coming in, you could use your open space, part of your open space requirement to do a community garden. You're allowed to do active recreation in a portion of the open space that are set aside as a part of those particular things. We just don't really have any developers who have taken advantage of doing any type of real active recreation outside of usually, shuffleboard courts, a pool, or a community center. It's not really real common here in Florida for that type of thing, but it's really interesting that other places are experimenting with that, and hopefully that will come to us. And you do have communities that have open space already as part of their subdivision, their homeowners association. They pay for that, the maintenance of that, the public space. They would be able to convert to this type of use, provided their land use allows for it. So in some areas, we may need to make some amendments for groups who are interested in doing that to allow for that use. But it's certainly something that we'd be able to be interested in doing.
It's exclusive only to that development. If you don't live or own a home in that development, you cannot go in there.
Well, it'd be the same thing, Anita. If you're in a homeowners association, it would be the people who are part of the homeowners association, however they want to regulate it, because essentially it would be a self-regulating thing.
It's not for me. I kill my plants.
Does anyone in the city, particular property. I think it's the first time it's come before our board. And I do remember Jesse Burke, even back when I was on the city commission in the 80s. He was at every city commission meeting, probably until she died or got too sick to come. But when she gave that to the city, were there any instructions that she wanted, or any desires that she wanted to happen to that property?
I don't think that she wanted it developed with real development, a house or any of that type of thing. I don't know that there was real stipulations in that bequeathment. The city manager is very confident, and again, they want to name that property once the garden is established for Jesse Burke, and I think that will again be something you will see in the near future coming forward to you to name properties, because we do that here once the garden's established. As a result of that, he was pretty confident that this is something that she would really appreciate having done on her behalf. So I'm very excited to be part of this. It's rare that you get to work for a community that has such pride in some of their residents. I mean, I got to work on naming a street after the Cantoneses, which was cool. It's really neat to be part of these types of little projects, that really are a testament to a community member. So this is a very exciting thing. I'd like to see this duplicated in other neighborhoods throughout the community, with some controls. Obviously, I like the whole idea of coming through with a conditional use, because it gives this board the opportunity to, again, let the public speak on properties that people are interested in converting and dealing with any kind of adverse impacts that might happen. We all like to think that everybody does things the same way that we do it. That's not the case. So sometimes we have to have rules to kind of help guide what's happening. And I think that this is a great place to start, because you're so close to City Hall. Any kinds of issues, there's people here who can come down and help and be part of that community garden if there's concerns or problems. So I think that this is a great place to start. It's not very far away from the mainstream downtown. It'd be a great replicate project, one of those pilot programs that we can then move forward on. So I'd like to see it expanded, but again, it's one of those things that we got to start somewhere, and I think this is a great place to start.
Certainly, community garden sounds like an interesting idea. I would just, knowing Ms. Burke, I was just hoping that the city's doing something that's within her wishes, or I think the ghost of Jesse Burke will come visit someone.
I've got a question for the applicant, if she's available. Hey, what about the other property owners, the neighbors? Because I'm thinking, if I would love to have a community garden next to my house, I think it'd be great to have. But also, I enjoy having my windows open also during nice days. And so, is the city looking at putting a buffer in, like for instance, like a podocarpus hedge or some type of viburnum hedge along the property lines, for when you have people, they're basically strangers public coming into the community garden, walking up and down the property as a privacy screening, I suppose, for the neighbors?
We hadn't looked at that. We wanted to provide the maximum area that folks could then go through, put in, because it's such a small site. However, it isn't a bad idea to think about. There wouldn't necessarily be a requirement, because this is a residential type use against a residential type use, so your code wouldn't require an 8-foot buffer, but it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to at least put, some type of, normally you'd require 8 foot, that's what your code requires. But it wouldn't be a bad idea to make that recommendation to the BOC see if they're interested. It's certainly something I could bring up on your behalf if you guys are interested as a group in having a control like that. Again, we just give you what we think from staff's perspective is the most pertinent details here, and that's not a bad idea, Jacob.
From a standpoint, like a common sense wise, because then if there's like let's say a coated chain link fence with some type of shrub, because then at that point you don't have people wandering onto your property or whatever's going on, out of respect for the neighbors. And I think that would be something that would be respectful to the neighbors. So what about then also talking to the neighbors about the neighbors parking in front of their houses? Is that going to be a concern? You said there's going to be a handicap spot, but then there's also city parking available. So is there road parking in front of these houses, or is that going to be just for the handicap spot?
Currently on Ring Avenue, there is open parking on either side of the street. That parking is open to general public, whoever wants to be there, whether it's a resident or whether it's somebody visiting or whether it's somebody who's coming here to City Hall and they just don't know where to park. Or I'll give you another example. When we have First Friday and all the streets downtown and the lots are all full, this becomes a free for all out here for parking. It's one of those things that because it's a wider road, it allows for that parking. So that's one of those things, Jacob, that they would be allowed, the parking would be open to the public. We just want to reserve a handicap space in front of this location so that if you have a handicap member of this garden club, they have a space and they're not trying to wheel down from where our handicap spaces are here up down a sidewalk that is questionable.
Yeah.
We want to do the sidewalk improvements and have that space right there available.
Well, what about the proposed development that hasn't come before the board yet, of the condos or the homes that are going to be built on the lot across the street?
Eco Village,
That's come before us.
it's come before this board. Just hasn't started construction yet. You've approved that. You approved that
I don't
development.
remember, when did it?
It's been almost a year now. That's the reason
Been
why
a
you don't
year.
remember. We're in the
Okay.
process of him
You're right, it
going through the
did.
building
It
permit
did.
process. It was a very protracted process, but their building permit process,
All
they're
right,
working through the process.
What about the parking for, on the street where they're concerned?
They would be entitled to the parking right now, the way Ring Avenue is set up. They would be entitled to the parking that's right in front of their property there, that's on the thing, but their actual parking for the individual units is going to be behind the property. If you remember they're creating the alleyway. They vacated the actual alleyway that's there because that's actually on Joe's office building site,
building, yeah.
but they created another alleyway that really functionally was parallel to the alleyway that they asked to remove. So as a result, they'll have rear-loaded facilities. They're going to be up on Ring Avenue with their houses. So while they have access and anybody has access there, they're going to be fighting the folks across the street that currently park there because there's a lot of people that park down there. If you come here at odd hours, you'll see in the evenings, you'll see there's a lot of people that park in that area.
And it's a
So they're
narrow
going to be
street.
they're going to have to deal with that. And it may be something that we have to look at as a city on management of that roadway, but right now it is what it is. Really what the city is interested in is just making that handicap accessible space make sense for that block of people, but also for the community garden so that there's one available. We don't want to take up space coming off Van Dora Lane in the back to try to put in a handicap parking space.
Well, Ring Avenue is very narrow, so they should be parking on just one side of that street. Where the garden is, that's a very narrow street. So we have to make sure that they park on just one side of it.
And again, that's something that we'll look at with the police department and evaluate it.
Yeah, because you can't get through with cars parked on each side of the street there. It's very narrow.
Heather, can I ask a clarification? So under the standards for review on number 1, it says the required parking may be reduced, but not greater than 30%. And it goes on within 600 feet of the parking lot for the city. And then it goes on and says the subject property lies within 313 feet of the rear of City Hall parking lot. I don't think that's an accurate number. By looking just at the map itself, if I counted 50, 100, 150, 250, 300, 360, by just looking at the map of aerial view.
Well, I'll check that.
It looks like it's within the reach, but it's still not. I don't think it's an accurate number recorded.
I'll take a look at that, Jacob. This was written by the principal planner. She was unfortunately unable to come tonight. We'll definitely look at that.
And then there's just a couple things I want to bring up also is I like the idea of this. I think it would be great to have something like this in multiple parts of the city. If there's something out by Sunset Beach or something off Claushman area, I mean, it is a great use. I love gardens and community gardens. But the aspect I like to think of is also it's a public area. So do we have to be concerned of, let's say you have children that are next door and you have pedophiles that come to the gardens since it's open too. Do we have to, I mean, is there something that we can put in to protect the children of the neighborhood to say this is an open public area technically, but we also want to protect our children in the event that there's something like that would happen?
I'm not really sure how you would.
Or would that just fall into place, like if you're at City Hall and someone comes in at City Hall?
Well, I mean, if you're at City Hall, the public is what the public is. You know,
Sure,
this building
yeah.
is open to the public. Generally, it's secure, a little bit more secure here as a result of some of the officials you have here because you have a security guard during the day. But as you guys know, when you come in for your night meetings, these doors are open. anybody can come into City Hall during those times. Be the same thing here, but recognize that even though it's public property, it's going to be leased to an entity. So that entity is going to have some control over what that property is utilized within parameters of our lease agreement, whatever that is, with that community group.
Have you seen like a park? The same stipulations fall like as a park code?
It's not necessarily, because it's not a park. It's a different type of use. Rules for that are going to actually probably be worked out as part of the lease agreement, because they're going to be stipulations within the lease, just like these stipulations that you're going to have, that you would put on this tonight, including if you wanted to add the buffer language. Those stipulations would then go into the lease agreement as part of, because this is part of the requirements of that property to use as a community garden. But it's not going to have the same type of rule structure as a public park, because it's not going to be, it's going to have a rental agreement. There's going to be a group that's going to actually be renting this property through the lease agreement from the city. So it's not going to be the same as a public park where it's open to the general public. It will probably be open to the general public for them to come to that, and they'll be invited there. But it's not going to be the same as public space normally is, where it's not controlled except by the city entity, which was where you get your park rules and those types of things.
So how is it a community garden if the city's leasing it to some entity? How is it a community garden if the city leases that whole property to some entity?
Well, that's the terminology that's been used, that the base is a community garden, and you have lots of examples of community gardens and CSAs that are done this way, where they're leased out to a group, and that group then organizes the community or those who are interested in utilizing that property, generally charging some type of fee, whether it's from a share of a crop in the situation of community-sponsored agriculture, or if it's a community garden where they rent out space. Usually it's generally space that they rent out rather than getting a share of a crop. So it's one of those things that that's the terminology used to define a community garden. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a garden that is completely open to the public. It just assumes that the community is being offered the opportunity to be part of that garden through, in this case, another entity, because the city is not going to be managing the garden.
I thought a community garden is where the community would open up the land and citizens or anybody can go in and rent a plot, and they would put a boundary and be able to grow their vegetables. That was my conception of a community garden. I didn't know about renting it out till tonight to a certain group or entity that would control. I thought community meant open, first come, first serve. They get a plot, they pay for that, and they get to put their garden in there.
Some communities use an open plan where they allow for exactly what you're talking about, Anita, where the community at large can come in and they rent out spaces. The city is looking to another group, okay, through the lease agreement to manage that site, because we're not going to be managing a community garden. So as a result, that entity that exists is going to be, through the lease agreement, required to provide whatever they're required to provide. Again, I don't have the lease agreement here, so I can't tell you what that lease agreement's going to include. I can guesstimate what the lease agreement's going to include based on the discussions that I've had with all the people who are involved in the process. But as a result, there's a couple of different ways you can run community gardens. You can have community-sponsored agriculture where it is one entity, usually a nonprofit, that manages that garden. You have other ones that are managed by a city or an entity or a private industry who actually owns that property. You have a variety of different types of gardens that you can do, and they still all fall under the definition of community garden, because it's still going to be open to the community. Now, it may be a limited community. This is, again, a small piece of property. Not everybody who wants a plot's probably going to get a plot. You're probably going to have a waiting list. It's just the nature of the size of that property. But the city is not going to be in the business of renting out individual plots. They are looking for an entity, whether that's a group, an individual, whoever ends up getting selected as part of that bid process, to manage that property, with stipulations that, again, are put into the lease agreement. Again, I'm putting some of those in tonight because I'm limiting the size of the accessory structure to the land development code. I'm not giving them a 40 by 40 building out there that doesn't fit the property. They're going to be limited by the setbacks that are in your land development code for accessory buildings. They're going to be limited to the size allowed in this commercial residential mixed category, and they're going to be in the height requirement that's required. They're going to have to meet all of those stipulations. That's what's being put on as part of this request. I'm making sure that it is clear to the individual who releases this property that they will need to seek HPB approval, that there is a process that they have to go through, and that a building permit's required. Those are the types of things and controls that are necessary to make sure that the building that's put on there is protected, that the community at large or anybody on that property is protected, and that structure is structurally sound and meets the requirements of our land development code.
When I first heard about it, of course, I got excited for the Grow Group, and I don't know if our high school has future farmers, that do agriculture this way. But that's something that just came into my mind, so I don't know. Well, whoever gets it has to work it out.
I think it's a good opportunity too for the city to look at putting some type of piece of art in the front of the garden by the road also. I know there are art funds built up over the years too, to focus on an area since it's city property to put a piece of art. I think that would be a good spot. So that's just a recommendation of mine.
Any other questions of staff? Any comments from the public on this item? Seeing none, we're open for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve with the recommendations with a one stipulation that a buffer of some sort with a narrow shrub that grows about 6 feet tall, and some type of chain link coated fencing be added to the property to protect the neighbors and have a buffer from the garden.
I just asked that we include, if we're going to include that condition, that the chain link fence be approved by the HPB because that is under their jurisdiction.
That's what has to be done. Yeah.
Is there a second to the motion?
Lady out there, question.
They're closed.
Oh, okay.
Okay, the motion dies for lack of a second. Is there another motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve application number 16-134, conditional use community garden resolution number 2017 as it stands.
Second.
Motion and second. Second by Mr. Parker. Motion was by Ms. St. Arnold. Discussion on the motion at this time. Roll call vote, please.
Ms. Protos?
Yes.
Mr. Haas?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Ms. St. Arnold?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. Carr?
Yes.
Mr. Vinson?
Yes. Next item on the agenda is the election of officers. As you all know, once a year, usually in January, we're required to elect a chairman and a vice chairman, and so we'll do that at this meeting.
Together, one at a time.
Oh, we'll take them one at a time.
I'd like to see the chairman of planning and zoning revolve because it's very interesting and very educational. And I'd like to nominate Merrill Seaman for chairman.
That could be
Okay.
interesting.
Merle's been nominated. Any other nomination?
I nominate Mr. Vincent. I think he's done a good job too, though.
Any other nominations? Okay, we'll take a vote. Let's see, I don't know, never had more than
do
one
that.
nomination that I know of at a time.
How you do that is each member will indicate who they actually want to select,
Okay,
and then majority wins.
makes sense.
Okay.
Okay,
Ms. Ms. Protos? Mr. Haas?
Mr. Vincent?
Mr. Seaman,
Mr. Vinson?
Ms. St. Arnold,
Mr. Vincent.
Mr. Parker,
Mr. Vincent.
Mr. Carr,
Mr. Vinson.
Mr. Vinson,
I'll vote for myself, thank you.
You're not gonna vote for yourself, huh? Did win.
It's okay. Next, we have the position of vice chairman. Any other nominations? Okay, we'll take a vote.
Ms. Protos,
All right.
Mr. Hasse,
Ms. St. Arnold?
Mr. Seaman,
Miss St. Arnold?
Ms. St. Arnold,
Am I supposed to vote for myself?
You can, should,
Okay, all right.
why not?
Mr. Parker,
Miss St. Arnold.
Mr. Carr,
Yes.
Mr. Vinson.
Yes. I think that's it. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Ms. Arnold.
Thank you.
And Mr. Carr has done a great job as vice chair the last, I think, 2 years or so.
Close to, it's 3 years actually.
Okay, 3
Hope
years.
to make a jump into another board at some point, sometime soon.
Right, I understand that. And, well, we appreciate your service as vice chair on this board.
Thanks.
Okay, next item is staff comments.
I only have one comment, and it pertains to next time's agenda. You're going to have 6 ordinances. I'm very, very, very sorry. It's going to be an entire city agenda. I do apologize, but we have 2 very large issues that need to come before this board and move through the process. One involves increasing the densities for temporary lodgings. That would be motels and hotels. That allows us to access the county's provisions in the countywide plan. So we're moving forward with that. And then the other one is the mobility management system, which is actually the replacement for the concurrency management system for traffic concurrency. So those are the 2 big issues that you're going to be dealing with. Unfortunately, I do apologize. It requires 6 ordinances for us to get there, but we will muddle our way through. So
When's
I
the
will
date?
be. That is February 13th. So that is when that meeting will happen.
I will
Thank you
be-
for the heads up.
February the 13th.
Because they're city-sponsored ordinances, I just put the advertisements out today. I will more than likely have all the language done. I have 1 ordinance left to finish the language in, and as soon as I get all of them, because I want you to have them as packages, because the land use and the comp plan go hand in hand, so I want you guys to be able to follow along with that, or be able to call me individually and ask questions if you have that option, that you want to talk to me. So I'm going to try to get it to you as soon as possible. Again, hopefully the next week, but again, I can't guarantee that. But I am pretty close, Anita, to at least having the language in a draft form. You may end up getting changes as I come forward, but I'll try to get it to you as soon as I possibly can. Even if changes happen at that meeting, I'll just keep a list of the things that change over time, because I am in the process of meeting with the folks down the county to make sure everything that we're doing is consistent with their documents. I want to make sure that this is a very smooth process.
I just wish items like that, that are a little bit controversial, come before us, that we had a work session to go through it first before we have it at a regular session, but that's not possible.
In this one, no, unfortunately.
Do we meet on the 2nd Monday or the 3rd Monday?
You're meeting on the 13th because I can't have 3 meetings in a row. So as a result, normally board, BOA, and planning board fall in both March and February
That's better for me.
all together. So
Okay.
that's why you're meeting a week ahead of time, because I need to stagger those meetings until I have staff that is completely up to speed where they're covering entire meetings. Having 3 meetings in a row means that when I get to BOA, I'm useless. I can just read the paper. I can't communicate much beyond that.
Thank you.
Any other staff comments?
That's all that I have.
Okay, we're next on the items is board comments.
Yes.
Otis?
I don't know if it's Mr. Seaman or who it would be, but a lot of times, agendas have developments, and people are always concerned about sinkholes. And they're always wanting to stop things like we heard tonight. The dredging's gonna cause a sinkhole, this is gonna cause a sinkhole. And yes, we know sometimes dredging does cause sinkholes. And I've been watching on WEDU, they've had some excellent programs about Florida and sinkholes. I'd like to have some explanation, and Meryl, I don't know if, Mr. Seaman, if you're, because you're involved with getting permits and things, I think we really, unless y'all understand it thoroughly about sinkholes, that we really cannot deny a plan because they're concerned about sinkholes. And it's been very heavy, especially down in the Miami area, that these programs have been developed, and they're very interesting. And I really don't know what to ask for, but I hear it time and again up here. You know, we don't want dredging, we don't want this, we don't want that. It's going to cause sinkholes. Like this development is across from Lake Tarpon, but there's a distance, you know, and you can't really judge it on some of those statements. And how do we correct that or rectify that? You and Heather may be able to. Do you understand what I'm asking about?
But dredging doesn't always cause sinkholes.
I know it doesn't, but people think it does. And we've got to be able to say, no, it's not going to cause a sinkhole, but nobody really knows. It's an act of nature as far as
Florida's like Swiss cheese. There's holes everywhere.
Well, there's not many items, I think, that come before our board that deal with the kind of permits of those activities that sometimes are accused of creating, and that may, in fact, you know, help facilitate sinkhole development. But
we've had a few since I've been up here, and it's sad, but you know, you can't stop a development plan because they're afraid of sinkholes.
well, the water development, the water plan, you know, drilling all the wells for the city's water thing. I mean, that was.
People are always worried about that, but it's not
that kind
true.
of drilling and pumping does cause sinkholes. I mean, it can, and that's been. I mean, that's a widely known fact, but we don't deal with that kind of issue much on this board.
I mean, there are, I'm sure, experts, and I don't profess to be one at all in relation to sinkhole stuff, but at DEP and SwiftMud, I'm sure that could talk to us if we have an issue that we need that kind of assistance on.
Well, the reason I brought it because twice I've been confronted by individuals who live in the area. You're not sinkholes, Mrs. Protus, in my yard, and if I get a sinkhole under my house, it's going to be your vote that caused it. And I tell them, no, it's not. You know, they don't understand, you know, and we can't educate them. I understand that. But if we had something that we could explain when it comes before us, that you can't judge a plan or an application because you're afraid of sinkholes.
There's all kinds of reasons why there's sinkholes. I mean, there's
I
not
know,
one certain
but
reason.
they
And in
don't know
fact,
that.
Well, that's
Up
part of
in-
the joy of serving on a board. Yeah.
Huh?
That's part of the joy of serving on
I
such a
know,
board.
it doesn't matter, but it's just that
Get accused of a lot.
something to explain. That's all I was asking
Okay.
about, but that's all
I
right.
mean, we have sinkholes caused by the builders that have dumped trash in the backyards in the 70s and before that.
Yeah, I've got one in my front yard.
Green Dolphin has a lot of that.
But houses on
Yes.
top. Yeah.
So, you know, but everybody thinks because the hole opens up, it's a sinkhole and someone has caused it. But it's just, you know, there are way too many factors that, you know, that is way beyond our pay grade here.
Well, I guess I asked it wrong. I was just asking for something to be able to explain to the people in the audience when they come up.
Thank
And they
you,
make
Ms.
those
Protus.
statements.
Are there any other board comments?
Happy New Year to everybody.
Thank you. So we adjourn. Is there a motion?
So move.
I move.
Motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
I move and I second.
We're adjourned at 8:08. Thank you.
Jacob, don't leave yet.
Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, I started out to the last meeting. We're out there.
Yeah.
viciously twice. But that's too bad.
If I can get her to come
They
in.
don't understand.
Guys, next month.
Okay,
Take care. Yeah, it's very
What to do with it.
I still love you.
Third one in. Send me an email and remind me, okay? So that way I can just email it to him and say, will you give Erica a patch? It probably won't be tomorrow because the lady didn't come in today in his office, which is why the doors were locked. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Walk out and get the sign.
Oh, all right.
Yes, I should be.
You want to call you?
All right, do you want oatmeal Saturday again?
What's that?
Oh, yeah, no, I needed to give you something.
I'll give you a call.
All right.
I'm not leaving, I'll just put this up.
Well, just don't give you your damn money then.
I would be okay. I wouldn't cry. You will be okay, I know you.
I'm not gonna leave you by yourself. We don't know who came in and is hiding in the bathroom. I want this historical thing.